So the reason a lot of you took this course is probably to learn Flutter and then eventually get a job in Flutter. So in this section, we're going to be covering some career advice that I have for you. Now, there's a lot of general advice out there, and we will quickly cover it here, but I wanted to focus a lot of this on some personal advice that I have from my life experiences that maybe you haven't heard about before. Like I said, this section, this specific lesson, we're going to talk about the general advice. This, of course, is important, and if you're looking for a job, you've probably heard about a lot of this stuff. And this advice is probably applicable to any developer-related job, not just Flutter. For another lesson, I want to cover it that there's actually a lot of different types of jobs in development. You don't necessarily have to be specific developer. There's front end, there's different types of actual development jobs. Then there's jobs that you might not even have to do that much development, but you have to know development in order to get in. Then I want to go through some Flutter-specific interview questions there could be. Some topics that you should definitely be comfortable with, and we're going to actually answer some potential interview questions and how I would answer them. And lastly, it is my belief that using social media, you can actually increase your chances of getting a job and become seen by more recruiters and have more opportunities. Now, this is something that's worked for me pretty well, so I wanted to make sure I include this here because this is something I've seen be pretty powerful from personal experience. So let's get into the general advice. So, of course, you need to know the topics which you're interviewing for. So if you're looking for a Flutter job, it's crucial that you know Dart. Flutter is written in Dart, so you should be comfortable with the language and be able to use it even in an interview. Second clear one is you should be comfortable with Flutter. Now, I know everybody took this course, so hopefully these two are relatively covered for you. The next thing is if you're going into something to deal with designs, you should know the design languages. So this is the Material Design for Android, and there's also the Cupertino library for iOS. It depends which one you'll be working with for which job, and even if you're not the main UI designer, just having the basic knowledge of how UI should look, I think is important. And lastly, this is just a guess, but I would say 80 to 90% of interviews are going to ask you about state management. Now, in this course, we went with Riverpod, but it doesn't have to be Riverpod. You could do any state management. You could do just your own state management, but be able to explain what state management is, how it works, and how you use it within your apps. Now, most of these were covered in this course, but there's a next step you have to take after taking this course, and that is to build projects. Now, we built a couple cool ones here. We built the Twitter app, we built the To-Do app, we built that animation with the rocket shooting up, but keep going. The more apps you build, the more problems you're going to run into, the better you're going to be able to solve them, the more practice you're going to have with Flutter, so the better you're going to do during an interview and in the job itself. Now, you could take these apps that we built, you can keep adding features to them, make them better if you want, or I think the best way to do it is to actually think of a problem that you have in your own life. Then you take that problem, build an app solution for it, and then you can work through it, build something that's pretty cool, and when you go into the interview process, you'll actually be able to talk about how you went from the problem phase all the way to the development phase, which is exactly what you're going to be doing at your job. The next part that kind of goes along with this is you want to put those projects on GitHub. So if you're unaware, GitHub is where you can host your code open source. So that means people can go in and take a look at your code. You can even take your code and run it, and they can see exactly how it works. Now, almost all developers use GitHub, and people that are hiring people that are going to be developing for them are probably going to go take a look at your code on GitHub. So make sure you put your code there in the first place, make sure it's quality code, and make sure that you're iterating on it so that people can see that you actually know how to develop proper applications. The next step that kind of goes along with that is set up your GitHub profile to look nice. Like I said, GitHub's kind of like a social media for developers, and you can actually have your own profile that looks like this. And this whole section over here, you can customize it to look however you want. I recommend writing a little bit about yourself, treat it kind of like a second resume. And it also tells you how active you are on GitHub, and you can include other little stats about yourself too. And you can even, down here, have a pin section where you can add some of the projects that you've worked on and some of the projects that you want people to see and notice and that you can show off. And the final step, and probably one of the most important ones, is to network. Now, you could do that through GitHub, but there's many different ways of doing it. My favorite way of networking is combining networking and practicing. Now, there's some different ways to do it. So like I said, you could do it with GitHub. You can work on open source projects. So for example, Flutter is an open source project. Let's say I really wanted to go work on a Flutter team at Google. I think the way I would approach it is I'd go work on their open source projects, open a bunch of issues, solve a bunch of issues, do some pull requests. That means I'll get comfortable with the code base. I'll get to know some of the people that are working there because you'll be interacting and messaging with the people that are working on Flutter or just other Flutter enthusiasts. Maybe you make some friends at the worst case, but then most likely if you go to a Flutter interview, they'll ask you about how you know development, and you can literally just be like, I've already worked on your product. And if I was doing it, I'd be like, I already proved to you that I can bring you value. Now imagine how much value I could bring if you actually hired me. So working on open source, I think, is probably one of the best ways to network and practice. Another great way to do it is joining some hackathons. So hackathons are hosted by companies where they have problems that developers outside of their company could potentially choose, and they win prizes. Now, this is great because, again, you get to meet a bunch of people that are working on the same stuff, hopefully make a lot of friends, and you get an introduction to the company as well. And if you win the hackathon, that's also a good look because you're probably using the company's product, and you could be like, hey, I already understand your product, and when you go on an interview, you have a good leg up on all the other interviewees. Now, there's a couple other ways to network. You could just go to local meetups. This is a great way to meet new people. And then you can also do it through social media, which we'll get into a little bit more. But networking is key. Think about it. The more people you know working in development, the more people could recommend you. The more people you might know that already work at companies, they could recommend you directly to their company to come join. Or even if they don't do that, they might know someone else looking for some employees. They'll recommend you there too. And if they know that you're a good developer, they see that you worked on open source, maybe won a couple hackathons, I think that's a big leg up in the interview process.